The clatter of the silver fork against the ceramic plate was the only sound in the suddenly silent dining room. It was a small sound, but in the cavernous quiet of my own Cincinnati home, it echoed like a gunshot. My hand was shaking, a tremor I had been trying to hide for months, a symptom of a grief and a stress that were eating me alive. My son, Tyler, sitting at the head of the table, my late husband's table, looked at me, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across his handsome face. "Having trouble there, Mom?" he said, his voice a lazy, mocking drawl. "Looks like you're conducting an orchestra." His wife, Nancy, tittered, a sharp, bird-like sound that grated on my raw nerves. They both watched, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt, as I struggled to spear a piece of my own meatloaf. In that moment, I wasn't his mother anymore. I wasn't Margaret, the woman who had raised him, who had built this life, who was grieving the loss of her partner of 50 years. I was a spectacle, a pathetic, shaky old woman who couldn't even manage to eat her dinner without making a scene. They thought my shaking hands were a sign of my complete and utter decline. They thought my quietness was senility, my sadness a weakness they could exploit. They didn't know that while my hands were shaking, my mind was becoming terrifyingly steady. They didn't know that their casual cruelty was the final ingredient in a recipe for revenge that had been simmering on the back burner of my soul for a year. They mocked my shaking hands. They were about to feel their entire financial world tremble and collapse. It all started, as these slow-motion devastations so often do, with an act of love born from a place of profound loss. When my husband Frank died, the silence in our sprawling two-story house became a living entity. It was a constant, heavy companion that followed me from room to room, suffocating blanket of grief. I was adrift in an ocean of loneliness, and the echoes of my life with him were a constant, painful reminder of everything I had lost. Tyler and Nancy, married for just over a year, were living in a cramped downtown apartment, perpetually complaining about the rent, their student loans, the general injustice of their starter life. My mother's heart, still foolishly programmed to nurture and to fix, saw a solution that I believed would save us all. I would have company, the sound of life to fill the dreadful quiet. They would have a beautiful, spacious home, rent-free, a chance to get on their feet. I remember the day I offered it to them, my voice full of a hope that now tastes like ashes in my mouth. "Why don't you move in with me?" I'd said one Sunday over coffee. "There's so much space here. You could save money, get on your feet, and I wouldn't be so alone." Nancy's eyes had lit up, a flicker of something I mistook for daughterly affection, but now recognize as pure opportunism. "Oh, Mom," she'd cooed, "we couldn't possibly impose." Tyler, with his smooth, practiced charm, had sealed the deal. "Margaret, you're a saint. We'll take such good care of you. You've done so much for us. Now it's our turn to look after you." I swallowed their promises like a starving woman. I believed them because I needed to. I needed the noise, the life, the feeling of a mother again. I helped them move their boxes in, clearing out Frank's old office to make space for their things. I didn't realize I was not just making room for their furniture. I was beginning the slow, painful process of my own erasure. I was a willing participant in the dismantling of my own life, naively believing I was building a new one for us all. The colonization of my home began subtly, with 1,000 small cuts to my identity, each one disguised as an improvement. The first thing to go was Frank's recliner, the worn leather chair where he had read the paper every morning for 30 years. "It's just so bulky and dated, Mom," Tyler had said, his voice laced with a gentle pity that was more insulting than outright disdain. "We found a much more modern piece that will really open up the living room." The modern piece was a cold, angular sofa that was impossible to get comfortable on. I didn't say anything. I watched the delivery men haul away Frank's chair, a piece of my heart going with it. Next, it was the wall, the family photos that lined the hallway, generations of memories. From my wedding day to Tyler's first steps were taken down one by one. "We're going for a more minimalist aesthetic," Nancy explained, as she replaced a cherished photo of Frank and me with a generic, mass-produced print of a fern. My history was being curated out of existence, deemed too cluttered for their new, streamlined life. My kitchen, once my undisputed domain, became a battleground. The recipes I had perfected over a lifetime, the dishes Tyler had begged for as a child, were now met with polite disgust. My meatloaf was too heavy, my fried chicken was too greasy. They embarked on a series of trendy, expensive diets, filling my refrigerator with strange green juices and foods I couldn't pronounce. The comforting aromas of my home were replaced by the smell of steamed kale and simmering resentment. I tried to push back, to hold my ground on the small things. I like my curtains, Nancy, I'd say softly. They were a gift from my grandmother. I know, Mom. And they're lovely, she would reply, her tone making it clear they were anything but they just don't go with the new color palette. We have to think about the overall look of the house. The house, not my house, the house. The language was shifting, and with it, the balance of power. Every suggestion I made was met with a patient, weary sigh. Every preference I expressed was treated as a stubborn refusal to get with the time. They were experts at making me feel like the difficult one, the one who was stuck in the past, the one who was preventing our new family from gelling. I was being gaslit in my own living room, made to feel unreasonable for wanting to see my own life reflected in the home I had spent my life creating. The injustice of it was a constant, low-grade fever. I would retreat to my bedroom, the last bastion of my former life, and listen to the sounds of them rearranging my world without my consent. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself this was the compromise required to have family around. But the loneliness I had so desperately tried to escape was creeping back in, and this new version was far more insidious. It was the loneliness of being invisible, of being a ghost in the vibrant, modern home my house was becoming. The assault on my emotional space was quickly followed by a strategic and devastating takeover of my financial independence. It was a masterclass in manipulation, performed with the loving concern of devoted children. They sat me down at the new glass dining table, the one that always had smudges on it, and presented a stack of my own bills with grave expressions. Mom, we were just going through these, and we're worried, Tyler began, his voice a perfect symphony of sincerity and concern. You have so much to keep track of. The mortgage, the utilities, your insurance. It's a lot for one person to handle. Nancy placed her hand on my arm, her touch cool and proprietary. We just want to make life easier for you, she said. What if we consolidated everything? We could open a joint account, and we can manage all the household payments from there. Your pension can be direct deposited, and you'll never have to worry about missing a due date again. My heart sank. Frank had set me up so carefully, ensuring I would be independent and secure for the rest of my days. My finances were my last vestige of my autonomy, the one part of my life they hadn't yet touched. I'm perfectly capable of paying my own bills, I said, a defensive edge to my voice that I instantly regretted. Oh, we know you are, Margaret, Tyler soothed, his tone placating. This isn't about you not being capable, it's about us taking on some of the burden. It's what families do. We want to take care of you. They used my love for them, my desire for a harmonious family, as a lever to pry open my life. To refuse their help would be to accuse them of something nefarious. To admit that I didn't trust them, it would shatter the fragile peace. And so, worn down, and wanting to believe in the best version of my son, I agreed. The next day at the bank, Tyler did all the talking. He charmed the teller with a story about helping his aging mother with her estate planning. I signed the forms, my hand unsteady, adding both their names to my checking and savings accounts. And just like that, they had the keys to the kingdom. For the first month, they were meticulous. The bills were paid on time, but then the bank statements started to tell a different story. There were charges from expensive downtown restaurants, online shopping sprees for clothes in Nancy's size, a weekend getaway to a spa in Chicago that I certainly wasn't invited on. The withdrawals were disguised as household expenses, her family needs. But I wasn't a fool. I knew my money was funding their increasingly lavish lifestyle. I tried to confront them, my voice shaking as I held up a statement showing a withdrawal of several $1,000s for home improvements. It had paid for the giant, wall-mounted television they now watched every night. "Tyler, what is this?" I asked. "We didn't discuss this. It's an investment in the property, Mom," he said, not even looking away from the screen. "It increases the value for all of us." The audacity of it left me speechless. My savings, the money Frank and I had scrimped and saved, was being used to improve a house they were living in for free, and I was being told it was for my benefit. I was no longer a person, I was a resource. I was the silent, involuntary financier of a life from which I was being systematically excluded. I was paying for the very decor that was erasing me, funding the very lifestyle that was marginalizing me. The injustice of it all settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy stone of resentment that I was forced to carry in silence. My world, which had once been filled with friends, hobbies and community, had shrunk to the size of the chair in my bedroom. The isolation tactics that Nancy and Tyler had employed became more brazen, more cruel. They no longer bothered with flimsy excuses. They simply cut me off. The house phone, which I now realized they had set up to forward to Nancy's cell when they were out, rarely rang for me anymore. On the rare occasion a friend did manage to get through directly, Nancy would often hover nearby, making it impossible to have a private or honest conversation. My best friend, Monica, was the most persistent. She knew something was wrong. She started showing up at the house unannounced, trying to bypass the gatekeepers. The first time she did it, Tyler answered the door. I was in the kitchen and heard his smooth, practiced voice. "Monica, so good to see you. I'm so sorry Margaret is right in the middle of a nap. She's been so exhausted lately." I was wide awake, holding a cup of tea, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run to the door and scream that I was a prisoner, but the shame held me in place. What would I even say? How could I explain that my own son was holding me captive? It sounded like the plot of a lurid television movie. Monica tried again a week later. This time, Nancy answered. Her approach was different, more insidious. "Oh, Monica." "Hi," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Mom's just having a bit of a confused day. Her memory, the doctor said. It's best to keep her environment calm and not have too many visitors. It agitates her." I stood at the top of the stairs, listening in horror. She was painting me as a senile old woman, incompetent and fragile. It was a lie designed not only to keep Monica away, but also to plant a seed of doubt, to discredit me in case I ever did manage to cry for help. The lie was a masterpiece of cruelty. It simultaneously isolated me and destroyed my credibility in a single stroke. After that incident, Monica's visits stopped. I couldn't blame her. She was trying to respect what she believed were my medical needs, manipulated into compliance by my own child. The loneliness became a physical ache, a constant companion. I had invited my family in to fill the silence left by Frank, but they had replaced it with a different kind of silence, a cold, menacing quiet filled with unspoken threats and the constant hum of their disregard for me. I was completely at their mercy, and they showed none. My days fell into a bleak, monotonous routine. I would stay in my room until I heard them leave for the day, then creep out to the kitchen to make myself some toast and tea. I would spend the day tidying up the house, washing their dirty dishes left in the sink, folding their laundry left in the dryer. I did it partly out of a lifetime of habit, and partly out of a desperate, pathetic need to feel useful, to somehow earn my keep in the home that was supposed to be mine. They treated me like an unpaid, invisible maid. They would walk past me without a word of greeting. They would discuss their plans for the weekend in front of me, as if I wasn't there. I was no longer Margaret, their mother. I was a fixture, a piece of furniture that occasionally moved and breathed. The injustice was a slow-burning fire in my gut. I had given them everything. My home, my financial security, my love. In return, they had stripped me of my friends, my dignity, and my identity. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own creation, haunted by the ghost of the loving son I thought I had raised. The tremor in my hands started subtly. At first it was just a slight, almost imperceptible shake. When I was tired or stressed, I dismissed it as a symptom of grief, of age, but as the months of their occupation wore on, As the daily slights and humiliations mounted, the tremor grew worse. My hands would shake when I tried to pour a cup of tea, when I tried to button my cardigan, when I tried to write a letter. It was a physical manifestation of the inner turmoil I was trying so desperately to hide, a betrayal by my own body. They noticed it, of course, but they did not see it as a symptom of my distress. They saw it as a tool they could use against me. My shaking hands became another piece of evidence in the narrative. They were building of my incompetence, my decline. "Be careful with that, Mom," Tyler would say with a sigh if I was carrying a glass of water. "We don't want you to spill." Nancy was more direct. "Margaret, maybe I should pour your coffee for you," she'd offer, her voice dripping with a pity that was more insulting than any direct criticism. They treated me like a child, like a fragile, broken thing that could not be trusted to perform the simplest of tasks. The humiliation was a constant low-grade fever. And then came the night of the dinner party. It was another one of their networking events, a house full of their sleek, ambitious friends, all dressed in expensive clothes, their laughter echoing through the rooms of my home. I was expected to play the part of the quaint, harmless mother, a smiling, silent prop in the background. I had spent the entire day cooking, my hands shaking so badly that it took me twice as long as usual to chop the vegetables for the salad. I made my famous meatloaf sliders, a dish that had once been a source of pride, but now felt like an offering to a pair of cruel, indifferent gods. I carried the first tray out to the living room, my hands trembling as I tried to navigate the crowded room. I could feel their eyes on me, the eyes of the strangers, the eyes of my son and his wife. And then it happened. A single slider, slick with a bit of grease, slipped from the tray and landed with a soft, pathetic thud on the pristine white rug they had recently purchased with my money. The room went silent. Every eye was on me, on the small brown stain spreading on the white carpet. My face flushed with a heat so intense I thought I might faint. Nancy rushed over, a look of pure theatrical horror on her face. "Oh, Mom," she cried, her voice a high-pitched wail of performative distress. "The rug. It's new." Tyler was right behind her. He didn't look at the rug. He looked at me, at my shaking hands, and he let out a short, ugly laugh. "Looks like Mom's had a bit too much pre-party sherry," he said to one of his friends, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The room erupted in a wave of polite, cruel laughter. And then came the final devastating blow. We were all seated at the dining table, the one they had chosen, eating the food I had prepared. I was trying to eat my own dinner, but my hands were shaking so badly now that I could barely hold my fork. The clatter of the silver against the ceramic plate was a small, insistent drumbeat of my own humiliation. That's when Tyler looked at me, a slow, cruel smirk spreading across his handsome face. "Having trouble there, Mom?" he said, his voice a lazy, mocking drawl. "Looks like you're conducting an orchestra." Nancy tittered, a sharp, bird-like sound that grated on my raw nerves. They both watched, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt, as I struggled to spear a piece of my own meatloaf. In that moment, something inside me, the last fragile thread of a mother's unconditional love, snapped. The humiliation, the pain, the injustice of it all. It coalesced into a single point of cold, hard, and utterly focused rage. I put my fork down. I placed my hands in my lap to still their trembling. I looked at my son, at the stranger who wore his face, and I did not cry. I did not scream. I smiled, a small, quiet, and utterly terrifying smile. They thought my shaking hands were a sign of my defeat. They had no idea they were the overture to a symphony of destruction that I was about to conduct, and it would bring their entire world crashing down around them. The party raged on, a cacophony of laughter and music that felt like it was coming from another planet. I excused myself from the table, my movements slow and deliberate, my face a placid mask of polite composure. No one noticed my departure. I was, as always, invisible. I went upstairs to my bedroom, and in the blessed sudden silence, I began my war. My first move was quiet and practical. I opened my jewelry box, a beautiful cherry wood box Frank had given me for our 20th anniversary. I bypassed the pearls and the sentimental piece. I took out the things that had real, tangible value, a pair of diamond earrings my grandmother had left me, a solid gold watch that had been my father's, a few other pieces I had inherited over the years. I wrapped them carefully in a silk scarf, and tucked them into the bottom of my purse. Next, I went to the small, fireproof safe I kept hidden in the back of my closet. Inside were my most important documents. I took out the original unassailable deed to the house, the one with my name, Margaret Davis, as the sole legal owner. I took out my passport, my birth certificate, and my social security card. And most importantly, I took out the will, the one Frank and I had drawn up years ago, the one that left everything, the house, the savings, the entire estate, to our only child, Tyler. I looked at his name on the document, and I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. I placed all of these documents in a large manila envelope, and added them to my purse. My final act of preparation was the most satisfying. I knew Tyler kept a spare key to his new expensive SUV in the junk drawer, in the kitchen. He was a creature of habit, and his arrogance made him careless. While the party was at its peak, while he and Nancy were holding court in the living room, I slipped downstairs. The kitchen was empty. I walked to the drawer, my heart pounding a steady, resolute rhythm. The key was there, just as I knew it would be. I closed my hand around its cool metal, a small, solid piece of my impending freedom. I went back upstairs. I packed a single small overnight bag, a change of clothes, my toiletries, my medications. I did not take much. I was traveling light, shedding the weight of my old life. I sat in my room, and I waited. I waited until the last of the guests had stumbled out into the night. I waited until I heard the sound of Tyler and Nancy, drunk and laughing, making their way up to their bedroom, my old bedroom. I waited until the house was finally blessedly silent. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I stood up. I took my purse and my overnight bag, and I walked silently through the darkened house. I did not look back. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. I walked to the driveway, where the new SUV, the one my money had paid for, was parked. I used the spare key to unlock the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The sound was a low, powerful purr, the sound of my escape. As I pulled out of the driveway and onto the quiet, suburban street, I took one last look at the house that held 40 years of my life, and I smiled. They had mocked my shaking hands. They had laughed at my life. I had just quietly taken the car, the will, and the house key, and I was never, ever coming back. I drove through the deserted streets of Cincinnati, the city lights a blur through my tear-filled eyes. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated liberation. I had done it. I had escaped. I drove for 2 hours. My destination, a small, unassuming motel just off the highway, a place I had booked online, with a prepaid credit card I had secretly acquired weeks ago. It was a clean, anonymous space, and it felt like a palace. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my best friend, Monica. When she heard my voice, she knew instantly that something had happened. "Margaret, are you okay?" "I'm better than okay, Monica," I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. "I'm free, and I need a lawyer." Monica, ever my loyal and practical ally, didn't hesitate. "I know just the person," she said. My second call was to a used car dealership in a neighboring town. I sold the SUV, Tyler's pride and joy, for a fraction of what he had paid for it. I took the cash and deposited it into a new bank account I had opened under my own name. The first phase of my counteroffensive was complete. I had assets, I had an ally, and I had a plan. I met with the lawyer Monica recommended, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright. The following day, I laid out my story, my evidence, the bank statements I had secretly printed, the notebook where I had documented their cruelty, and the original, unassailable deed to my house. Ms. Albright listened, her expression growing colder and more furious with every word. When I finished, she looked at me with a mixture of professional outrage and personal empathy. "Margaret," she said, her voice like steel, "what they have done is not just a moral failing. It is a legal one. This is financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and illegal tenancy. We are not just going to get them out of your house, we are going to make them pay. Her words were a validation, a confirmation that I was not crazy, not bitter, not hysterical. I was a victim of a crime, and I was about to become a plaintiff. The first legal document Ms. Albright drafted was a new will. I sat in her office, and with a steady hand, I disinherited my son, Tyler. I struck his name from the document that had once promised him a future of security and ease. In his place, I named a single beneficiary, a local foundation that provided housing and support services for elderly women who had been victims of abuse and neglect. My pain was going to become someone else's salvation. The next phase of the plan was the house itself. We are not going to file for a messy eviction, Ms. Albright explained. That gives them time to fight, to delay. We are going to do something much cleaner. We are going to sell the house right out from under them. The audacity of it took my breath away. While they were living in their house, nursing their hangovers from the party, they would be completely unaware that the very ground beneath their feet was being legally sold. We hired a discreet real estate agent who specialized in pocket listing. He presented himself to Nancy and Tyler as an appraiser from the bank, sent to conduct an evaluation for a home equity line of credit. They, blinded by their own greed, bought it completely. They proudly gave him a tour of the house, pointing out all the upgrades they had made with my money. They were unwittingly acting as sales agents for their own downfall. I waited, my days a tense mixture of hope and fear. I stayed hidden, moving to a small, furnished apartment in a town an hour away. I was a ghost, orchestrating my own resurrection. They had no idea where I was. Their frantic, angry phone calls went unanswered. Their world was beginning to tilt, and they had no idea that I was the one controlling the axis. I sit on my new balcony now, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and I watch the sun rise over the Ohio River. My life is small and beautiful, curated not by my son's aesthetic, but by my own sense of peace. I bought a lovely, manageable condominium in a quiet complex, with a community garden and a library. It is not the large house of my past, but it is a home, and every inch of it is mine. I have reconnected with my friends. Monica and I have our weekly bridge games again, and the laughter is a healing balm to my soul. I have found new purpose. I used the money from the sale of the house, and the assets I reclaimed, to establish the Margaret Foundation, a non-profit that provides legal aid and emergency housing to elderly victims of familial abuse. My son's greatest insult has become my life's most meaningful work. I have not heard from Tyler or Nancy directly since their world imploded. I heard through the grapevine that they eventually divorced. Nancy apparently moved to Seattle to start over. Tyler is still in Cincinnati, working a menial job, a ghost of the successful man he so desperately wanted to be. A few months ago, I received a letter, forwarded from Monica. The handwriting was Tyler's, a shaky, looping scrawl. It was a long, rambling letter, filled, not with apology, but with a litany of his own hardships. His life was so difficult. He was so lonely. It ended with a single, stunning sentence. After everything, I think you owe it to me to help. I read the letter, and then I did something the old Margaret would never have done. I laughed. A real, deep, genuine laugh. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. I took the letter, walked over to the paper shredder Monica had given me as a housewarming gift, and I fed it into the machine. I watched as his words, his entitlement, his complete lack of self-awareness, were turned into a meaningless confetti of paper. My help, my love, my resources, they were no longer his to claim. I had found new places to invest my heart. I had found myself. My story is not one of revenge. Not really. It is a story of reclamation. It is the story of a woman who was told she was a joke and remembered she was the one who wrote the whole damn show. It is a story about the quiet, unshakable power that comes from knowing your own worth, even when those closest to you have forgotten it. I am not a victim, I am a survivor. And as I watch the morning light spill across my garden, I am filled with a profound and lasting peace. He mocked my shaking hands, but I was the one who got the last laugh, and a whole new, steady life